Hello, welcome back to the GameBlox tutorial videos. This video covers movement, both two-dimensional and four-dimensional movement. So basically platformer games and kind of standard exploratory adventure games. So these are the blocks. There are four movement blocks over here. Really two flavors of four-way, two flavors of two-way, and we'll talk about those in a second. So I'll grab the four-way block right now and we'll do that first. You see we have a game over here where the character can move through hallways. So what we want to do is set up a system that is moving the player when you press keys. That's what this first statement means this block will do. Give it a speed. Give it a condition for when to do that action, because there will be times when you want a cutscene to play or some other game action to happen, and you'll want this to turn off. So we want to pass it a condition. And then we also want to tell it what to check to know whether the player is colliding with a wall. So we're going to specify all of that. When the game starts, we will start this movement block. We won't do it right away. Actually, what we're going to do is create a variable for what the player collides with, because at some point the player will reach the edge of this screen. We'll want to go to a new screen. So we'll want to change what the player is colliding with. So we're going to create a variable to store that information. We'll just call it collision sprite for all sprites, just so we can access it from anywhere. And so at the start of the game, we will set that variable equal to the name of the sprite that we want to collide with, and this happens to be called walls. So the walls are called walls. There we go. So now we can attach this movement block and we can know what to tell it. So we're going to just do movement all the time. We're not going to put a condition here. If you built out a whole game, you probably have a variable that's called state or character state or something that could be equal to walking, it could be equal to cutscene, sleeping, whatever the states of the game are. And then we could put logic here telling the movement system when it's active and when it's not. But for now, we're just going to make it simple. We're going to put a true in here. Now notice there are two ways to drop a true in. You can drop it in with a big white highlight and it puts it in very cleanly like that. This means it's going to evaluate it instantly when this command is executed and send a value in. What we really want to do is tell the block what script to run, or what procedure to run, and that you can do by dropping this in with a gray border around it. So you can kind of see it's got to move it around, find the right place to let go of the mouse, and you get a gray border. That means every time this runs, every frame of the game, basically it'll reevaluate this, and it'll always get true in this case, but you can put something more complicated there. You just have to make sure that you have that gray border around it. So we will do something more complicated here. So we want to put a condition for when player is colliding with something, and that will be a check to see if we're colliding against this collision sprite. So we'll get that condition from here. This is the touching condition. It's in diamond shape, so it goes in here. Again, make sure you've got a gray border on it. And typically you would do a pull down here and name a specific sprite like walls, but we want to be able to swap it out. So if you go to another level, we want to be able to set this variable collision sprite to a new set of walls, and then have this movement system automatically start checking that new sprite. So we'll just drag collision sprite out here, and that should do it. I think we should have movement now. So we'll start the game, see what happens. So yeah, we're bouncing off the walls, can't get out of the hallway, so we can go up and down, and you could put a little collision sprite up here or some other check and pop to the next location if you want. And all you would have to do to update the movement system is just change this variable. So just another one of these set commands, set collision sprite equal to walls 2, and then you would have a command to make this wall hide, or this sprite hide, make the new sprite unhide, and you're in business. So to see all that in action, you can look at the movement sample in the examples folder, and you'll see this structure there, but you'll see a little bit of additional logic to catch the condition of a player bumping into a door, going to another location, and then making that change I talked about, basically changing this collision sprite variable. So that's one way to do it. Now notice that this is all white. This script is still running. Once you hit this movement command, it runs forever. It's just a continuous loop. It takes these 2 bits of script into it and just goes forever. And the way you talk to it and change it is by setting this variable. Now, that's fine. That may actually be the best way to do it, because you can swap this out too, like I said, with exactly the same kind of construct where you're checking a variable, namely the state of the player. But alternately, you can do a different approach, and I'll show you that with this different command. You may want to have your logic within your own script. Let's go ahead and stop this. So there's one reason to do that, one particular reason. I guess one secondary reason is that it might clean up your logic a bit if you have logic around this yourself to decide when to run it. Basically, this command runs once, and then you've got to run it again yourself to keep the movement system moving. You're kind of pumping events into it to keep it going. So you have to wrap it in a forever script. So this will keep it going. What you would do is put your logic here. You would say forever if state equals walking, do this. You could put some logic around it and only run the command when it needs to be run. We would do the same colliding command here, and then we're pretty much done. So we're basically doing the same thing. We're just evaluating true every time, but you could put logic around it. The main advantage to this is that you could change this variable or this value here periodically. If you have a game where there's a change in the player's speed in kind of a very dynamic way, if they're going up a hill or dealing with wind or something like that, you might actually get a little bit better performance using this one in that one particular case. But typically this bottom one here will be a better performing block because it takes everything internal and just has a nice tight loop. So that's the concept there. The same exact variant exists for 2 dimensions as well, for the 2-dimensional movement. It gives you the same option for that block as well. Okay, with all of that, let's move to doing the 2-dimensional movement, which involves a slightly more setup. Go ahead and just get rid of this stuff. We'll do this forever again in a minute. So we're going to make this sprite hide. We're going to make the walls hide when the level starts. So we don't need those anymore. Okay. So we'll make them hide. Make the ground show itself. Alright, we should have a new type of game now. Let's go ahead and put him where he needs to be. Kind of ground. Okay. So, to get movement happening on him in 2 dimensions, it's the same structure. We'll use the collision sprite. We'll instead set it equal to ground. And then we'll grab the 2D block. Okay. We got a speed. We'll do the same thing for this condition. Whenever true, colliding when, touching collision sprite. Alright, and that should do it. It's got a bunch of logic internal to it to make sure the character stays on the sprite. There we go. So it kind of assumes that your gravity points down and some things like that, but you know, this gets the basic concept working. Same deal here. You can use the other version of this two-way sprite to keep the logic within your own loop. I won't show that again here, but it's the same exact structure as the 2 variants of the 4-way movement. Now, obviously for a platformer, you want to do more than just move back and forth. You want to be able to jump and land on platforms and whatnot. To see that, look at the platformer example in the examples folder. And also, there is a separate tutorial video specifically on getting the platformer system working, which involves physics and switching between physics and the movement blocks. So that's a separate video. Look for that in the tutorial list. I think this covers all of the issues around the movement blocks. Good luck. One more thing to note about the movement system is that for the player to be free to move around these sprites, the sprites need to have empty pixels around them. So what that means specifically is that in the paint editor, you'll see this checkerboard pattern. That means there are no pixels there. These are actually invisible. If you bring in art from a program like Photoshop, you're probably familiar with this. You can create the empty pixels in another program, but here by default they are empty. When you start drawing a picture, you just start drawing these lines. You'll be drawing on an empty background, so you'll be just fine if you draw a bunch of walls like I just did here. If you bring in another piece of art and you want to have the player move around within it, you'll need to cut out sections, and one way to do that is to use this color here. You can see there's an empty color down here in the palette. So if you're cutting up someone else's art, you can use this, draw a box with the empty color, fill, use the paint bucket to fill in with the empty color, and that way create hollow space for the player. So that's worth being aware of if you're going to start doing this. Same with the ground, it's drawn on an empty background. So with that, I think that concludes everything you need to know to create movement in your games. Advanced users may want to customize which keys are used to move the player. So by default, the arrow keys are moving the player around. There isn't a nice, clean public interface for changing those keys, but if you really want to use the WASD keys or something like that, here's one way to do it. You will have imported these movement blocks into your game. You're free to customize them. So if you right-click on a block here, or you right-click on a block over here, either way you can get Edit. So if you go to Edit, this will actually edit the global block used by everything in the game. But either way, this will open up the code for that block. So this is a little bit scary to look at, but it's pretty easy to find the conditions for the key presses. So if the right arrow is pressed, change X by the speed. If the left arrow is pressed, change X by the opposite of the speed. So you can just change the key here. You can pull it down, pick the key you want, and this block will then operate with the keys you chose. So not ideal, not extremely friendly, but the ability is there to change the keys if you need to for your game.